Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Tom Sunic, your host from the VOR. Welcome back, and I'd like to welcome our special guest tonight, Tito Perdue, a famous novelist, at least famous in some circles I know of here in Europe and also in the United States of America. Tito, welcome to my show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Tito Perdue, a novelist from the South. I guess your novels can be described as social satires reflecting the end of the Western world, blended with a reflection by the main protagonist about the futility of his life, of his own life. How does that sound, my own definition? Am I right on the track, or would you like to rectify a little bit the statement of mine?
Well, what you say is basically correct. I would just add that he has not quite given up on life, but he is indeed alienated from postmodernism, and that he is dismayed by decadence that has afflicted the West over the past 30 and 40 years, and he is horrified at what has happened to the American culture, and presumably the European culture as well. So, it is a story of a man and his wife who have tried to escape, tried to defend themselves against the ambience, the current political and social ambience, which has derogated Western civilization. So this is a man that harkens back to the Greeks, or to the Italian Renaissance, or to Elizabethan London, the sort of a person who would love to see a restoration of the European high culture, and who is appalled at the popular culture of today. Well, from my point of view, the ambiance of New York is diseased. It is a disease. It is overloaded with a fanatical materialism, which is very different from the South. I don't mean to say that the South is free of greed, or free of business, or free of the business mentality. But in New York, it is the only thing that matters. In New York, unless you have a high-paying job, you might as well not exist. But in the South, you can go into the South with very little and eke out a living, and have friends, and have leisure, and spend your time fishing and talking, and all in all, a much warmer cultural climate than the North. When I first went up north, I thought I was going to perish because of the icy coldness of the people. And I soon began to learn that the language of New York is simply money. You either have it or you don't, and if you don't, you would be better never to have been born. It is a coarse, crude, materialistic, it is an environment that is beyond belief to someone like me, who came out of a friendly, hospitable South. Now, I don't claim the South is still that way. I mean, the South, unfortunately, is becoming northernized as industry and as big business moves into it and preempts the agrarian culture that used to prevail in the South. My grandparents, for example, were more or less successful people. My grandfather was a builder, a home builder, and a very good one. And he had a brick mill, and he worked all the time. And he built up a large family, a family that was collegial and that loved each other, and that used to spend their evenings on the front porch telling tall tales about fishing and hunting. It was a society where you could go to sleep to the sound of crickets and owls, and wake up whenever you wanted to wake up. And there was no panic. It was not panic-stricken about the acquisition of money. People down in the warm climate of the South knew that they were never going to starve to death, not when you can go outside and pick blueberries and scuppernons and shoot a squirrel or two. There was not that panic to subsist that I see in the big northern cities. I spent a lot of time up north, and I came to despise it, to loathe it, so that my patriotism, such as it is, only extends about 200 miles from where I am right now. I have very little patriotic feeling for the northern part of this country, or for the western part. In other words, the two coastal regions of east and west, to me, are a sort of hell on earth, and I had rather be dead than to be forced to live in those areas. Dissident movements always come to power during times of economic distress. Mm-hmm. It was the Depression that brought the Nazis to power. It was World War I that brought the Bolsheviks to power. So I think we have to bide our time, wait for an economic catastrophe, and have developed ideas that answer the questions that people will have. Maybe then we can begin to accumulate political power. Maybe then we can at least influence the directions of our society. I'm not romantic enough to imagine that we're going to have a second American Revolution within the next half century. And people like me will never live to see it. But the United States has so many contradictions in its policy. For example, let me give you an example. American liberals adore diversity. They just adore diversity. But at the same time, they want to set up multicultural organizations within the United States, which inevitably will homogenize. Mm-hmm. Now, homogenization and diversity are opposites. You can't have both homogenization and diversity at the same time. If I had my way, the world would comprise 10,000 independent sovereign nations, each one of them unique, each one of them carrying on its own experiment, each one of them following a trajectory of its own. That's diversity. Diversity is when the nations are different, not all alike. The American idea that we must have one uniform global culture that looks just like our culture is a catastrophe, is a tragedy. Mm-hmm. It destroys local cultures.
But basically, your character, Lee, well, I guess this is pretty unique. He doesn't criticize, he's not, he's not hostile to minorities or to people of different races. He's hostile to white Americans who are slaves themselves, who chose to be slaves by their consumerism and by their own decadence. And this is the problem you are trying to address, and I hope you will also address it in your next novel. Could you please take your stand, if I can use the Southern Agrarian, that manifesto, which I liked very much. What is your stand on that? I mean, it's basically the white Americans who are the problems. It's not the problems, the people that you see, those cholos, all those mestizos you see in your vicinity.
That's right. That's right. Instead of degrading minorities, I want to save them. I want them to retain their culture in their own countries and develop according to their own bent. It's when we all come together under one uniform fog of liberal democratic conformity that means that the whole wide world is going to turn into just a pit of similarity and identity without any color, without any uniqueness, without any way to learn from each other. In my country, I would like nothing better than to see the 50 states all become independent countries. I mean, our states are rich enough they could support themselves. I mean, at one time they did. The Confederate States of America were doing very well. They did not have to be drawn back into a union that they did not want to be members of. The idea that most people believe that Lincoln went down south and waged war because he did not approve of slavery is absolute nonsense. He was not worried about slavery. He said many times that the South could keep slavery as long as it wanted, just so long as it did not secede. It was secession that he could not endure. He wanted to retain the South within the Union because the North needed the South for economic reasons. The war was simply in order to force the South back into the Union. I mean, it was the exact opposite of what George Washington had done when he managed to tear the 13 colonies away from the British Empire. Everybody thinks that was a wonderful activity. He succeeded. The colonists succeeded in becoming free of Great Britain, and we worship those people. But here in the South, if we wish to tear ourselves away from the Leviathan, which rules us in inadequate ways, it's considered treason. It's considered horrible. It's considered evil for the South to wish to be independent. My own state of Alabama would do perfectly well if it were an independent country. And the people, I can guarantee you, would be more alive, more happy. They would know each other. They would be acquainted with each other. The black and white people in Alabama get along far better than the black and white people in New York City, because we actually know each other. We know each other. 25% of my state is black. If New York City was 25% black, you'd have civil war 24 hours a day. You know, so it's the hypocrisy of the North that is infuriating. They shake their finger at the South, whereas the South is far more integrated than the North. We have black mayors. We have black congressmen. We live next door to black people. My own neighbors in my own neighborhood, all of my neighbors are black. All of them. 200 or 300. I'm the only white person in this neighborhood, and we get along splendidly. The relationship between black and white people in the South is far better than these self-righteous, indignant liberals up north who are always shaking their fingers at us.